Hi and welcome to today's video. Today we are going to celebrate the world famous composer Handel. Join me as we dig deep into the mystery books and discover the truth behind the legends. A 7-year-old George is scolded by his father once again. He tells him no good will become of his musical pursuits and forbids him from having any musical instruments in their house. Whilst his parents aren't in, little George sneaks a keyboard instrument into the attic of his house and spends many secret hours perfecting his skill and setting himself up for a lifetime of musical achievements, despite his father's intent. In November 1741, on a chilly afternoon, an ensemble is gathered to perform a world-first premiere of one of music's most beloved works. The venue was Parkgate Port in Cheshire, England. The ensemble was made up of a ragtag band of singers with a famous face at their head. George Frederick Handel waved his baton, and the choir sprang into life, to the amazement of the dock workers and passers-by. The glorious sounds of his latest work, Messiah, drifted on the airwaves, encouraged by the strengthening sea breeze. It was not the venue he had chosen, but George smiled as his new work filled the hearts and minds of the listeners. In April 1749, at the height of his fame, George quiets the performers before their big moment. His firework music is ready at last, and this glorious combination of music, pyrotechnics, crowded wooden room, and popular flammable fashion is unleashed upon the gathered crowd. Disaster strikes, and a cannon blast goes astray, setting fire to the building and causing mass panic and many injuries. The ensuing flames engulf the whole building, whilst the fireworks chaotically spark and bang all around. Now these are great stories, but are they true? Well, some of them are, at least in places, but maybe there's a little more for us to discover about the fabled composer. Join me as we dig into the legends surrounding some of Handel's most pivotal moments. Story 1. Piano in the Attic. Well, Handel is one of the world's most famous and well-known composers and musicians, but just who was he and how did he become so famous? Let's wind the clock back to 1685, when little George was born. This was the same year as two other famous composers, Bach and Domenico Scarlatti. And the musical world was at the height of what we now call the Baroque era, a time when music is remembered as formal, complicated and full of twiddly bits. And Handel grew up in the city of Halle in what was Brandenburg, Prussia, now modern-day Germany. His father was an eminent barber surgeon for the court of Saxe-Weissenfels and the Margravate of Brandenburg. So he was, as it sounds, a barber who also performed medical surgeries, which was a common occupation crossover at the time. His father's work connections played a pivotal role in the story of his son's rise to musical stardom. So here's where the story of the attic comes into the tale. You see, Handel's father had high hopes for his son and wished for him to become a lawyer. Yep, the classic Billy Elliot story is coming, don't worry. The story goes he found out about his son's musical wishes, which were possibly spurred on by the headmaster at his school, John Praetorius, an accomplished musician, and well, he did what any self-respecting father would do in his place, and banned any musical instruments from the household. The evidence of this comes from many of Handel's biographers, so it's generally accepted as fact. This banning of instruments then, did it lead to Handel forgetting about music and working hard to become a lawyer that nobody remembers? Luckily for us, no. The truth is that Handel was probably gifted a clavichord or a spinet, both which are early compact keyboard instruments, and he probably practiced in a room towards the top of their large house away from his disapproving father. Now, evidence for the truth of the whole of this story is a little scarce, and there are inconsistencies about all of this in the various biographies. But however you tell the story, Handel must have had some experience of music, because sometime between the ages of 7 and 9, he accompanied his father on a business trip to the largest town in Saxony-Anhalt, Weissenfels, where we can say everything changed. He made his way to the court organ in the palace chapel, where his wondrous playing was overheard by the Duke. Handel would go on to credit Duke Johann Adolf I as his benefactor throughout his life. The Duke recommended that Handel be given musical education, and he went on to be instructed by Friedrich Zachow at the Hall Parish Church. Zachow is given the credit of introducing the young Handel to the wealth of German and Italian music, which formed the backbone of his musical knowledge. Now, after a period of about 3 or 4 years, it's thought that the young Handel surpassed his current teacher and was looking for a new challenge. Not bad for a journey started in some kind of secret practice room. Onwards then, towards the next story, the debut on the docks. Now, it's going to take a while to get there, but I do feel it's important to put some context to this one, so bear with me as we take a whistle-stop tour of Handel's life and learn what made him quite so famous. Let's start then with another year in the mix, and indeed a somewhat mixed up time for historians too, but the next stage of Handel's journey to that fateful dockside. Version 1. 1698. Handel travels to Berlin at the age of 13, 1 year after the death of his father, where he meets some composers, Ariosti, Bononcini, both famous Italian musicians. During his visit, Handel's father communicates with the King of Prussia and declines an invitation on Handel's behalf to travel to Italy on a stipend. Yeah, his father is said to have sent this letter after his own death. The source of this misaligned date is the first biographer of Handel, John Mannering. Now, Mannering was an English theologian who published in 1760, at first, anonymous biography, entitled Memoirs of the Life of the Late George Frederick Handel. It's claimed to be the first full-length biography of any composer. Perhaps it was. It's unfortunately also both full of wonderful factual information, supposedly gathered first-hand, and frustrating mismatched dates, fantasies, and other potential errors. So let's try version 2. Handel travels to Berlin, but at only 11 years old, the year before his father's passing. And with a chaperone being needed at such a young age, we have to invent a family friend or relative to accompany him. So we also have then the puzzle remaining about this version. Why would Handel's father sanction such an expensive trip for at least 2 people to travel somewhere to foster his musical education when he himself didn't really want Handel to become a musician and kind of had the lawyer thing stuck in his head? Let's try then, final version. Version 3. Most modern explanations now have the trip back at 1698, as in version 1, and discount the idea of the king's communication. It's most likely, like a lot of writing about famous people, the facts kind of got condensed from a series of events spanning a few different years into one more narrative-friendly episode. Let's fly then through the rest of Handel's youth. Handel attended university in Halle in 1702, where he did frequent lectures on law, possibly to honour his late father's wishes. He did not stay for long though, and after 1 year accepted a position as organist at a large church in Halle on a 1-year probation. Now, whilst he was at university, he was probably influenced by many things, but notably August Frank, who was professor of Oriental languages. Frank founded an orphanage and introduced Handel to charitable ideas, which most likely shaped his own future philanthropy. After this year was up, he moved to Hamburg, which was known as a free city that encouraged the arts and had a thriving opera scene. Handel got a job as a violinist and a harpsichordist in the orchestra of an opera house. He went on to write his first 2 operas, Almira and Nero, in early 1705, and two further operas, Daphne and Florindo, which are known to have been performed in 1708. In 1707, Handel travelled to Italy, where he would spend 4 years living in Rome and visiting Florence, Venice and Naples for commissions. It was there, in the opera capital of the world, that Handel's fame grew in magnitude. He also overcame Rome's ban on opera, and like many of his fellow composers, he diversified into other styles of music, even writing operas, cleverly disguised as sacred stories. And so we reach another big moment in Handel's life, the move to England. I'm not sure, after building fame and fortune in the lovely climate and culture of Italy, what would possess someone to travel across the world to visit our humble little country, but presumably nobody told him about the weather. In 1710, Handel was appointed musical director to another George, back in Hanover, Germany, but he obtained permission to travel to London for a period of 12 months. Oh, the other George, by the way, would soon become King George I of Great Britain, but we'll get to him in a moment. In England, Handel enjoyed great success with the country's first Italian-language opera, Rinaldo. Despite then travelling back to Hanover for a year after this, Handel managed to convince the nearly King George he was working for that he should once more travel to England, where he was supported by many wealthy patrons who paid him for his work. He received a yearly income of £200 from Queen Anne alone, after composing a choral composition about a treaty. That's Utrecht, if you're interested. In 1714 then, Queen Anne died, and George, the Elector of Hanover, finally became George I of Great Britain. Remember that Handel had sort of abandoned his post to stay in England by this point, so perhaps he thought that the £200 might not have carried over the change in leadership. In 1717, his water music was performed numerous times for King George I on the River Thames, possibly to try to win over the king, but nobody knows if it did. Handel's salary, though, was doubled, so we can probably put that in the evidence pile for all was forgiven, maybe. That same year, then, Handel became house composer at Cannons, a stately home in Middlesex. Here, with the support of the Duke, who owned the estate, Handel would found his own short-lived opera company, the Royal Academy, which is not in any way related with the current Academy. And this is where his music flourished, and he wrote for aristocrats a steady stream of operas in the popular style of the day. By 1723, he had moved into a house on Brook Street in London's Mayfair, and this is now the Handel House Museum. During 1724 and 25, Handel wrote 3 more successful operas, Giulio Cesare, Tamerlano, and Rodelinda. Later, also, the famous March of the British Grenadier Guards was derived from his opera Scipio. In 1727, yet more acclaim was to be had, as Handel wrote anthems for the coronation of King George II, of which Zadok the Priest is perhaps most well remembered, having been played at every British coronation since. So, although the style of opera which Handel is most famous for was at its peak, perhaps some signs of its waning were starting to show as society shifted towards emerging alternatives. And Handel went on to write 7 more operas in the ensuing years, and although the Royal Academy closed its doors after just 9 years, Handel went on to start a new business in the Queen's Theatre at the Haymarket, now His Majesty's Theatre, where 25 of his operas premiered up to 1739. And this is where the story takes a turn for the worse. As in April 1739, aged 54, Handel suffered a stroke. Fortunately, after being paralysed in his right arm and unable to perform for a few weeks, he made an excellent recovery. And during this time, he started to write more oratorios as opposed to operas. An oratorio is a kind of large-scale, usually narrative work for orchestra and voices. They're performed without costumes, scenery, or action. And Handel was no stranger to oratorios. He'd written many of them before, and because of his large preoccupation with Italian opera, he just had a few texts waiting on the back benches still to be set to music. His friend and writer, Charles Jennens, had supplied him with the text for the oratorio Saul previously, but it took Handel around 3 years to get to writing the music to that one, not doing so until 1738. Jennens also might then have supplied the words to another oratorio, Israel in Egypt, which had been a little less successful, but the momentum for oratorios had been building up to the fateful year of the stroke, for sure. As Handel wound down his opera writing post-stroke, he was supplied in 1741 by Jennens with the text for a new oratorio, Messiah. Messiah would tell the story of the saviour of humankind and be split into 3 parts. It's so huge, it would just need an extra video all about Messiah, which maybe we'll do another time. In brief, the parts are divided into scenes, and each scene is a collection of movements which take the form of recitatives, which are a kind of early rap, arias, solo songs, and choruses, where everybody sings at once. There are also 2 instrumental numbers, so as I say, it's massive and it can take a fair few hours to perform. This was nothing for Handel though, as his operas had been known to last much, much longer. In fact, it's known from his own records, he composed the music in around 24 days, in late 1741, much to the displeasure of Jennens, who thought he should have taken more care with the work. Now, other stories would later have a much more interesting explanation for the speed of writing, with some even suggesting divine intervention. Handel was a quick worker though, and he would often write at a similar speed before this, for his operas. In fact, he was so exhausted from writing Messiah, he started his next oratorio, Samson, within a week of finishing. So it's clear he was a clever worker too. He was also used to including adapted previous works, and he did so in Messiah, as was common practice at the time. We reach then, finally, the premiere of this great work, Messiah, perhaps on the dockside, waiting to sail to Ireland, but being delayed by bad weather. Handel's decision to travel to Ireland. Now that was under invitation from the Duke of Devonshire, who was, at the time, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, and he had some other connections over the water too, who'd look after the orchestra, etc. Handel wasn't going for the purpose of debuting the newly written Messiah though. He was simply going to give a season of concerts of some of his other music. Jennens was not even informed of this intention, and is known to have been most displeased with the Irish debut. Hang on then, when does the docks bit come in? Well, it doesn't really. It never features in any biographies and seems to have been the invention of later writers. It is true that Handel's journey was delayed a few days, but in reality, due to the adverse weather, he stayed in and departed from Holyhead, which is an alternate port situated on the coast of North Wales, at about 60 miles away as the crow flies. He only reached Parkgate upon his return from Ireland in April 1742. So is there any truth to this legend, debut on the docks? I don't think so. It might be that he was toying around with ideas about how to adapt Messiah for different sizes of choirs on his travels before the debut, but no dockside performances have ever been noted. Messiah's Irish debut was in the Great Music Hall in Fishamble Street, Dublin, and it was a great success. It took many years though to reach the same positive reception in London, and it was debuted there in 1743 and has many more tales associated with it we haven't time for today. We must skip on a few more years, and Handel once again was commissioned to write a masterpiece, this time to be performed in 1749 for King George II, who, if you remember, Handel had composed the coronation music for some years before. See, the king wanted to celebrate the end of a war, the War of the Austrian Succession, and this was to be no ordinary musical work. It was planned to be performed alongside a grand fireworks machine in a purpose-built structure. Disaster, though, struck when, in a rehearsal, a soldier had his hand blown off by a cannon, which was used in the performance. Further to this, on the day of the first official performance, which was the 27th of April 1749, the weather was rainy. and this is thought to have caused misfires in the fireworks machine, meaning that in the middle of the show, the right pavilion caught fire. It is also known that stray rockets did indeed set a woman's clothes on fire, burn 2 soldiers and blind a 3rd. So this legend then is most definitely true, even if the events are often exaggerated. Health and safety might be frustrating at times, but we can certainly see why it's necessary. So what became of Handel? There are more tales to tell, and many we haven't covered today. Most notably his serious carriage accident in 1750, and perhaps his botched eye operation by the quack surgeon John Taylor, who also mistreated Bach and worshipped the occult. Yep, I'm looking forward to exploring more of that story. By 1752, Handel was completely blind, but despite this, he fought on to continue performing and composing right up to his death in 1759 at the age of 74 from presumed lead poisoning. Now, as he was officially a British subject, made so by an Act of Parliament named after him, Handel's Naturalisation Act, Handel was buried in Westminster Abbey. Now, I do hope you've enjoyed this delve into Handel's fascinating world and learnt some things from the 3 legends we've explored. If you did, please remember to press the like button and subscribe to the channel below to be notified when a new video is released. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Which was known as a free city, and it encouraged the arts and had a thriving opera scene. Thriving. After this year was up, he moved to Hamburg, which was known as a free city, that encouraged the arts and had a thriving opera scene. I can't say thriving. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.